Yes, sir.
everyone.
Yes.
This is Dr. Mahidar. He was our former UG and then a PG. He was good at everything, master of a jack of all trades, but I can't say master of none. He has mastered prosthetics. And when I said I need a topic, suggest Mahidar, he selected the most appropriate thing. And my favorite also, centric relation, starting with the significance. Yes. Now I don't
Yes,
want to
sir. Yes, sir.
continue talking. I think if I need to stop talking. Mahidar, you take over.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you. A very good evening to everyone. So this is Dr. Surabhi Mahidar. I don't want to tell more about myself because sir has already introduced me, and it's a great pleasure to be in JSS again, virtually, not physically though. But I'm very glad. I'm happy to see Anil sir, Raghu sir, Dakshani ma'am, and my batchmate, of course, Soumya here. So when sir asked me about the topic, I
Don't
chose.
forget, don't forget, don't forget Divya Vashist and Meena.
Yes, sir. Devi, yes, sir. So, sir, when sir asked me about the topic, I chose occlusal appliance therapy as my topic of choice, which stabilizes the masticatory system in centric relation. Why did I choose this topic is because these days we see a lot of cases with a lot of stress in day-to-day life. So when they come to us, we fail to diagnose as the oral diagnosticians, because dentists are basically the oral diagnosticians. The term like that by Sir Dawson. So I thought this would be an appropriate topic as of now. And then I thought I would discuss something about the stabilization splint, which is made in centric relation and which is given to the patient to relieve various kinds of pains that exist in the stomatognathic system. So first, when I start with the presentation, I want to show this diagram just to emphasize the fact that the masticatory system is not just about the teeth. So when we are doing an equilibration procedure, let it be a full mouth rehab, let it be a selective grinding, let it be an orthodontic procedure, let it be an oral surgical procedure to get everything together, it's just not about teeth. So if we are just placing crowns or removing some enamel over the teeth without taking few things into consideration, it is a sure shot failure. So when I speak about this diagram, if you see, the evolutionary process has gone down this way and it has not gone up this way. So the first bone that is formed is your temporal bone, and then your glenoid fossa, the TMJ, and then the jaws, muscles surrounding the jaws and the teeth that finally fit in the sockets. So when we speak about any procedure, we also have to follow the evolutionary procedure process that has been there in the human body. So first we start with the TMJ. We make sure that the TMJ is in its comfortable space, in its happy position. And then we move on to the muscles of mastication that are surrounding the jaws. We make sure that they are also at peace. And then we move on to teeth that are there in the sockets. So if we don't take consideration, the TMJ into consideration, muscles into consideration, directly place crowns over the teeth or directly give something over the teeth, then we are not taking the whole system, the whole stomatognathic system into consideration. We're not doing any justice to it as an equilibration procedure. So this is the first thing which I want to emphasize upon, that TMJ is the starting point of any kind of equilibration procedure. Let it be a splint, let it be a full mouth rehab, let it be an orthodontic procedure, or let it be a surgical procedure to equilibrate the system. Now coming to the common complaints of patients whom we see in our OPD practices, the most common complaint of the patient is their tooth pain. That's a common complaint which we see. That is not what we are talking about today, because tooth pain is a very, very wide topic to be spoken about. Let's skip that. The other common complaints which we see in our practice are headache, neck ache, back ache, ear pain, and eye pain. So when we see such things in a practice, the first thing that strikes our mind is, okay, let me send it to a general med, let me send this patient to an orthoped, or let me send this patient to an ENT. Fair enough. Fair enough. If the root cause of the problem is something related to these things, it's fair enough. But once we send the patient, and if the concerned specialist has ruled out everything which is related to his or her specialty, then we come into picture. We need to find out the root cause which is there inside the oral cavity and treat the problem. So all these categories of pain which we see in our general practice come under temporomandibular disorders. So when I speak about temporomandibular disorders, these are disorders which are related to the temporomandibular joint and as well as the muscles which are surrounding the jaws, especially the muscles of mastication. So we need to rule out what is the root cause for this problem and why is headache coming because of this problem? Why is a neck ache coming because of this problem? And a simple diagnosis with a simple treatment plan can get rid of these pains in the stomatognathic system. That's why Sir Dawson calls dentists as the oral diagnosticians. So when other specialties fail to catch or pinpoint the root cause of the problem, then it's our duty or responsibility to see and catch that. So let's see how we can do it. What are the basic types of TMD? As I said, there are two basic types of TMD, temporomandibular disorders. One is intracapsular disorders, and the other one is your extracapsular disorders. So when I say intracapsular disorders, TMJ is bound by a capsule, a fibrous capsule. So inside the capsule, what is happening is the true TMJ problem. So outside the capsule, whatever is happening is not a true TMJ problem and is related to the muscles of mastication which are surrounding the jaws. So the occlusal muscle disorder category comes in extracapsular disorders, whereas the true TMJ disorders come in intracapsular disorders. Today, we are not speaking about the true TMJ disorders. It's a separate topic to be spoken about. What we are dealing today is about the extracapsular disorders, which are also known as occlusal muscle disorders. So what is the common causative factor for occlusal muscle disorder? The simple, most common factor which we see in our general practice is a tooth interference. What is a tooth interference? A tooth interference is nothing but a point which lifts other teeth away from each other. Suppose I have an interference on 3-6. The moment I go back and bite my mandible onto the maxilla, that tooth interference lifts all other teeth away from each other. So when that tooth interference is acting as a hindrance between the maximum intercuspation and the centric relation, that becomes a problem inside the stomatognathic system. So if that tooth interference is the common problem for all these neck aches, back aches, headaches, then it has to be diagnosed, it has to be removed, or it has to be taken into consideration. That's the most simple thing which we can do for a patient to relieve various kinds of pains. So what happens if there is an interference? If there is an interference, there are signals that are sent to the brain. So what brain does, it catches that there is something abnormal that is happening inside the oral cavity. So when there is something abnormality that is detected by the brain inside the oral cavity, then it sends signals to the muscles. The main muscle which is responsible to take the signals from the brain is your lateral pterygoid, in simple words. So the lateral pterygoid is attached to the condyle inside the TMJ in a horizontal fashion. So when the brain sends signals to the lateral pterygoid gets activated. So it receives the signal, brain tells, okay, you have to do something about this interference inside the oral cavity. I'm not seeing something normal happening inside the oral cavity. So do something. So lateral pterygoid takes those signals and it starts working on the interference. What does it do? It either tries to escape the interference, it tries to shift the jaw position so that the interference is bypassed, or it tries to erase the interference. It tries to kill the interference. So when it tries to shift the jaw to another position when there is an interference inside the oral cavity, the condylar position is also shifted. Suppose you have the condyle position in its most stable position in the glenoid fossa, and if there is an interference, obviously the lateral pterygoid will try to pull the condyle anteriorly and the jaw position is shifted. Or if the interference is big, where the jaw cannot escape the interference, then it tries to erase it. That pattern of erasing the interference inside the oral cavity is known as parafunction or bruxism. Usually we see such kind of bruxism during daytimes. If there is an interference related bruxism, it is called diurnal bruxism, which we see during daytimes. In case we see such kind of bruxism during night times, it might be related to the brain. It might not be related to the interference as such. So if patient is having a psychosomatic disorder, if patient is going through cycles of anxiety throughout, stress, then what happens? The brain takes control during night times. The sympathetic and parasympathetic systems, they get activated. And then the muscle overrides the jaw, having these kinds of movements during daytime and night times. So usually diurnal bruxism is related to the interference and nocturnal bruxism is related to stress. Which is more harmful? Obviously, the nocturnal bruxism is more harmful because you need to deal with the brain there. You need to deal with the anxiety a patient is undergoing through. But if in case there is a diurnal bruxism without nocturnal, it can be taken care to some extent by catching that interference inside the oral cavity and doing something to it. What all we can do to that interference? Let's see in the coming slides. So in case the patient comes to you with a neck ache, with probably a backache or a headache, a temporal headache, or an ache which is there on the cheek, and the respective specialty has overruled it, that we are not concerned with it. There is no root cause when it comes to orthopedics, when it comes to general med, everything is normal. Then what we can do is we can do a simple test at the beginning itself on the dental chair in our practices to rule out whether the causative factor is in the TMJ or the causative factor is in the muscle which is surrounding the jaws. So the simple test which we do is known as load test. The simple test which we do is known as stabilization test or immobilization test. So I'll show you both the tests, how it has to be done. So if you see this picture, this is a load test which we do to rule out the true TMJ problem. So when I say about the true TMJ problem, it is the intracapsular disorder which I'm talking about. It's not about the muscle. So what we do, we take the thumb, we keep it on the occlusal surfaces of the molar. We take the other fingers, we catch the inferior surface of the mandible. We get a grip like this. So we go inside with the thumb, put the thumb on the occlusal surfaces of the molars. We catch the inferior surface of the mandible with the other fingers, and with the other hand, we go onto the angle of the mandible, and then we do this movement. We push backwards and downwards with one hand. We lift the jaw at the angle of the mandible with the other hand. With this. So what we are hinging the mandible in anterior-superior position. So the moment we start applying this pressure or load over the joint, and if patient says, doc, I'm having some pain, then it means that there is a pain for the pressure we are applying. There should not be a pain for the pressure we apply. Then the TMJ is healthy. If there is a pain for the pressure we apply in this direction, and if patient jumps with pain with minimal intensity of pressure or load, it almost confirms you that there is some kind of problem in the temporomandibular joint and it's not healthy. So this is the first test which we do, which is known as load test. This is given by Rocabado. So this is called Rocabado map of pain, where this is the 7th and the 8th pain in the map, which we do just to rule out that there is no problem in the TMJ. If patient says, no, doc, I don't have any problem, I don't feel anything sensitive in the joint when you do this, then yes, I can proceed to the next test, which is known as stabilization test. So if you see this picture, we tell the patient to clench and then move the mandible in the clenched position. So we tell the patient to give a minor play to the mandibular movement in clenched position. So I clench and then I move. I don't open. So in clenched position, if I move the mandible in the intercuspation, maximum intercuspation, it simply means that the TMJs are immobile now. Only if I open, only if I protrude, only if I do these lateral excursions, my TMJ is into action. It becomes mobile. The condyle becomes mobile. If I don't do all these movements, I just close my oral cavity in static direction and then clench. It's the muscle that is getting activated and not the joint. The joint becomes immobile completely. So in this clenched position, if there is any pain and the patient says, yeah, I'm having some pain here when I'm doing this, it means that some kind of muscle is becoming hyperactive and it is the causative factor for the pain. So these are the two simple tests which we can do in clinics on patients to rule out the difference between the intracapsular and extracapsular pathology. Stabilization test or immobilization test, if it is positive, it means that there is some kind of muscle problem. If load test is positive, it means that there is some kind of joint problem or true TMJ pathology that is existing. The different types of TMJ pathologies that are there, that's not our topic today. So let's skip that and we'll concentrate on the extracapsular or muscle problem and how to give a stabilization splint in the oral cavity. So what if load test is positive? It is almost sure that it is a true TMJ problem. So we stopped at the true TMJ problem. If load test is positive, then it almost means that there is a true TMJ problem that is existing inside the oral cavity. But I want to be very much sure about it if there is a true TMJ problem. Just by doing load test, I don't want to give a confirmatory diagnosis to the patient that there is a true TMJ problem. So I send the patient now to an MRI. Usually I prefer a motion MRI for the patient to see how the condyle is moving and if the disc is getting reduced, if the condyle is getting reduced under the disc or not. So I refer the patient for a motion MRI and then I get a confirmed diagnosis that it could be a true TMJ problem that is existing. And then I rule out the problem. Suppose if immobilization test or stabilization test is positive, then it means that it is related to the muscle surrounding the masticatory system. We deprogram the muscle and then we proceed for equilibration. What do I mean by equilibration in simple words is to eliminate the interference. That's all. Whether we give crown, whether we do ortho, whether we do selective grinding by just removing the interference, that we decide once we do a diagnostic mounting on an articulator. But equilibration in simple words means you have to eliminate the interference. So what are the modes of equilibration? The first mode of equilibration is to test the prognosis of the permanent treatment we are going to do. Permanent treatments are only three types. One is selective grinding, one is your orthodontics, and one is prosthodontics. Before undertaking these irreversible procedures, which are the permanent modes of treatments, we go for an reversible treatment, which is known as a stabilization splint. So the first mode of equilibration is your stabilization splint. We give the splint to the patient in centric relation by giving a mutually protected occlusion on the splint. And once we give the splint to the patient with these facilities on the splint, with these incorporated in the splint, we check the improvement of the patient probably for around 1 or 1.5 months or 2 months max. And then we proceed with this permanent treatment modalities. So we start with stabilization splint. I'm so sorry. I think here it's raining heavily. So signals are breaking up here and there. Stabilization splint, we start with that. And then we check inside the oral cavity for a period of time, probably around 1.5 to 2 months. If the patient is feeling better, if the patient is feeling confident about the reduction of problem, then we start with either selective grinding or prosthodontics or orthodontics, whichever the mode of equilibration is. So what's the final objective of any equilibration? Whatever we do, if I'm doing a full mouth rehab, if I'm doing an orthodontic procedure, or if I'm doing selective grinding or giving a splint, whatever is the mode of equilibration, the final objective of equilibration is mutually protected occlusion in centric relation. So I'm not talking about maximum intercuspation here at all. The basic difference between maximum intercuspation and centric relation is maximum intercuspation is tooth related, whereas centric relation is joint related in simple words. So if I'm biting on the maxilla with the mandible, just like that, it is my tooth's guided position. That might not be equal to centric relation, that might be equal to centric relation. We don't know. Some patients, there might not be interference. Some patients might have undergone treatments before. That maximum intercuspation might be equal to centric relation. We never know that until we do a diagnostic mounting on an articulator. But this is the basic difference between maximum intercuspation and centric relation. That's why in complete dentures, we don't have the concept of maximum intercuspation. We take centric relation as the guide, and then we build up maximum intercuspation on dentures. Whereas in dentition, in natural dentition or FPDs, we have maximum intercuspation as the guide, but we take centric relation as the final stop for any kind of equilibration procedure. So we depend on the joint and not on the teeth, for a simple fact that 98% of the population would be having an interference in maximum intercuspation. So we don't want that interference finally when we give a prosthesis, when we do an orthodontic procedure, when we do selective grinding. So the main aim is interference-free occlusion in centric relation. These two, if we give on a splint, these two, if we give on a full mouth rehab crown, these two, if we give on a finished orthodontic procedure, then prognosis of the system is very good. The teeth are in equilibrium with the muscle is in equilibrium with the TMJ, and so on. So it's a tripod which forms as a stable unit inside the stomatognathic system if we take care of these two things. So what is a mutually protected occlusion? Let's see. Basically, we have two kinds of occlusion. One is bilaterally balanced occlusion and one is mutually protected occlusion. We all know that bilaterally balanced occlusion is given in complete dentures or any removable prosthesis, because we need to take care of the stability of the prosthesis inside the oral cavity. But when it comes to mutually protected occlusion, there are two components in the oral cavity which are protected mutually by each other. It's just like two hands shaking with each other. One is your anterior segment and one is your posterior segment. The anterior segment protects the posterior segment. The posterior segment protects the anterior segment. There are two kinds of occlusion. One is static occlusion when we close down, and one is dynamic occlusion when we protrude and when we do the lateral excursions. So in static occlusion, what happens? When I close down, the posteriors are taking more load because the posteriors are arranged straight in the sockets. They have multiple roots inside the sockets. So they are in a better position to take up the compressive loads that are falling on each other. So the posteriors take more load, the anteriors take less load in static occlusion. That's how in static occlusion, posteriors are helping the anteriors. So this one segment is helping the other. When it comes to dynamic occlusion, where the mandible is moving front in protrusion, the anteriors are guiding the mandible front. So when the anteriors are guiding, the maxillary anteriors palatal surface is guiding the incisal surfaces of the lower anteriors. And when protrusion is happening, I should see an immediate and progressive disclusion in between the posteriors. If that is not happening, if the disclusion is not happening in protrusion, the posterior teeth are still rubbing against each other when the jaw is coming forwards. I don't want that. Because when the posteriors are rubbing against each other in dynamic movements, number one, there would be a lot of occlusal wear that is happening over the teeth. Number two, the muscles that are surrounding.
Mahidhar, your screen is blank. Your screen is blank.
So, no, sir, I have not still moved it. I thought I'll explain and then move the points in. Shall I proceed, sir?
Yes, please.
Yes. So when I am moving my mandible forwards, the posteriors should not rub against each other. If the posteriors are rubbing against each other, number one, there would be a lot of occlusal wear that would be happening. Number two, the muscles that are surrounding the jaws would become tensed, it becomes stressed over a period of time. Number three, the joint, the TMJ, which is there, would go for a toss on a longer run. So I don't want that to happen, whether it is natural dentition, whether it is full mouth rehab or an orthodontic procedure, or even on a splint, which we give inside the oral cavity. So that's my final aim. When there is protrusion, there should be immediate and progressive disclusion. In late protrusion, when the mandible is moving sidewards, the common point which we need to remember, or the most practiced point which we need to remember, is your canine guided occlusion. So if the canine is so long inside the socket, when the root of the canine is surrounded by cortical bone, which is very strong, I would take the canine to guide the mandible in side movements, in simple words. I don't want the premolar, I don't want the molar to be affected with these side movements, because there would be a lot of tensile forces or oblique forces that would be falling on them. So I would take the canine as the guide if canine is strong, if canine is periodontally not compromised. That is known as canine guided occlusion. So when I'm moving towards the right, I should take my canine into consideration and give the guidance so that all other teeth inside the oral cavity are discluded. There is no contact of any other tooth when the canine is guiding the occlusion towards one side of the lateral movement. When I come to the other side, it's the same scenario again. The canine has to guide and all other teeth have to be discluded inside the oral cavity. So in protrusion, anterior guidance gives me immediate and posterior, progressive posterior disclusion. Canine guidance will give me disclusion in between all other teeth inside the oral cavity. This is known as mutually protected occlusion. The posteriors are helping the anteriors in static occlusion. The anteriors are helping the posteriors in dynamic occlusion. So in simple words, this is known as mutually protected occlusion. Where can I go for a group function is my next question, or my next doubt inside the mind. If I'm saying canine has to guide in the lateral excursions, can I go for group function if the if the canine is periodontally compromised, if it is probably grade 2 or grade 1, then I can take the next premolar or the next premolar, at the max the mesiobuccal cusp of the first molar, into consideration to distribute the stress because it is weak. That is known as group function. If the canine is absent and I'm giving an implant in the region of canine, I can take premolar as a support, which is next to the canine, and give the lateral occlusion. This is known as partial group function. So the group function comes into play, comes into existence only if the canine is compromised. If it is periodontally weak, if it is absent, if it is replaced by an implant, then we should take the group function into consideration. Otherwise, group function is not ideal, because the more number of teeth you give as a stress breaking mechanism inside the oral cavity, the more amount of lateral forces you are putting on the teeth in lateral occlusion. That is not favorable when it comes to muscle and TMJ. So we don't go for group function only if there is a full mouth implant case where you have multiple implants and I don't want the canine implant only to take up the stress. I give a group function inside the oral cavity when I'm doing a full mouth implant prosthesis. That too a shallow group function and not a steep one. So this is how we need to decide where we need to go ahead with canine guided occlusion, where we need to go ahead with group function in different scenarios. So if you see this examination, teeth examination, the posteriors take up more load and the anteriors take up less load. We usually have this misconception in the mind that the anteriors should not touch each other, because in complete dentures what we do, we give overjet and overbite. That's a different concept altogether. But when it comes to natural dentition or fixed prosthesis, this does not hold good. You should not have an open contact in the anterior region. There should be a contact of the lower anteriors to the upper anteriors, but a minimal contact, probably of around 8 to 12 microns if I'm checking with an articulating paper. When I'm checking in the posterior area, probably around 40 microns of an articulating paper can be used to check for the contacts. So more load is taken by the posteriors, less load is taken by the anteriors. But make sure that there is a contact. If this contact is not there, your anterior guidance is lost. The moment mandible starts traveling forwards, there is still posterior rub of the teeth happening. I don't want that. The moment mandible starts traveling forwards, there should be an immediate disclusion of the posteriors. That happens only if we give the contact. If we don't give the contact, I don't see an immediate posterior disclusion happening inside the oral cavity. In simple words, anteriors should have a minimal contacts in the teeth. So this is how the dynamic occlusion takes place. When it comes to edge, you should have a posterior disclusion. This patient had a problem because if I see from this view, I can see that only one tooth is touching the opposite tooth. That is a big no-no. Because if one tooth is taking up the stress like this, when it comes to the opposite tooth, either this tooth might go for a toss on a longer run or this tooth might go for a toss on a longer run. If I'm having anterior guidance, I should have at least 2 teeth as in contact or 3 teeth or 4 teeth. The most favorable is 4 teeth if they have the distribution as anterior group function. But sometimes or most many times we might not see that scenario clinically. So spread it as much as possible, but not on one tooth. If one tooth contact is there, the anterior guidance is not correct inside the patient. We need to correct it either in the form of orthodontics or restorative procedures. So if you see this picture, the patient had a lot of group function, which is not favorable again. If patient tells you that, doc, I have pain, and if you see group function, you can tell that, okay, this is what is happening inside the oral cavity. There's a lot of group function, which might be a causative factor for the pain in the stomatognathic system. Sometimes patients might not tell you any symptoms. Patients might tell, I'm okay with this. So in such cases, you need to understand that there is some kind of adaptation that is happening inside the oral cavity or the TMJ or the muscle. That is known as adaptive centric. So whatever is the problem that is existing inside the oral cavity, sometimes patients might tell you, sometimes patients might not tell you. If patients don't complain, and if you don't see any signs inside the oral cavity, usually it's better not to touch it. It's better not to touch a sleeping snake. So we better leave it like that. If you see any signs or if patient complains of any symptoms to you, then you should start working on it. Because I don't want to disturb the adaptation which is happening in the masticative system. Many times, what we see is different from what is happening inside the oral cavity. So we leave it like that if there is no sign and symptom. Sometimes signs might precede symptoms. So you might see signs like occlusal wear facets. You might see signs like abfractions. You might see signs like incisal wear. You might see signs like the incisors getting flared up with diastema, mobility of the teeth. So all these are signs which we might see before patient tell you something. If patients don't tell you and you see signs, you have to alert the patient. Okay, I'm seeing something like this. You need to be careful in the future. You might not be having any problem right now, but you might be ending in some problem in the future. So please be careful about it. So we might need to alert the patient if we see signs before any symptoms. So that's how we need to categorize, that's how we need to differentiate the problems inside the oral cavity. So here I would like to take away this group function, convert it into a canine guided function in the form of orthodontics. The patient was 23 years old. I don't want to do any restorative procedure in this patient because of the age, and the patient is also ready to wait for a certain amount of time. So the patient was treated and we changed the patient to a canine guided occlusion, basically a mutually protected occlusion inside the oral cavity in centric relation. So that's how we need to plan. The final aim of any kind of equilibration is this. If you see this picture, you will understand that it is dots at the back and lines in the front. What do I mean by dots at the back? When I close my mandible onto the maxilla in centric relation like this, there should be a contact between the functional cusp and the opposite fossa. In simple words, if I'm going for full mouth crowns, I would concentrate on only 2 points. One is the functional cusp point and one is the central fossa point. So cusp to fossa is what I aim at when I do a full mouth rehab crown case. But when it comes to natural dentition, when I'm doing selective grinding, I would also see for the marginal ridge contacts. It is allowed because in natural dentition, it is 1 tooth to 2 teeth contact. So I can concentrate on marginal ridge as well as fossa and then functional cusp. I do not want any contacts on the cuspal inclines. A big no-no on a cuspal inclines because those are the contacts which give oblique forces, which give tensile forces. Those are destructive loads on the teeth. So whatever points we get on cuspal inclines, whatever points we are getting on the non-functional cuspal inclines, we try to eliminate them and concentrate on functional cusp to fossa and at the maximum marginal ridge contacts. If it is natural dentition or if it is a single crown or a 3-unit bridge. But when I am doing a full mouth crown case, then I would concentrate on only cusp to fossa contacts at the back in static occlusion. But when it comes to dynamic occlusion, when I move the mandible front, it has to be lines only on the anteriors, not on the posteriors. So if I find lines on the posteriors like this, it means that in anterior guidance or in protrusion, the posteriors are rubbing against each other, which is a no-no. So you should have only the front lines that go front in protrusion and the side lines that go side in late protrusion. You might not be having the sidelines on anteriors sometimes, the incisors, the centrals and laterals. It's okay. If I have a sideline on a canine, that's still favorable. Don't intentionally create sidelines on the incisors. If it is there, leave it. If it is not there, if it's there only on the canine, it is acceptable still. We need not intentionally create the lateral lines on the incisors. But the straight lines, as much as possible, have to be distributed on the anteriors. It means that there is an anterior group function happening, which is helping the whole system together to move front with posterior disclusion. So this is the perfect formula for equilibration. Let it be a full mouth rehab, orthodontics, or your selective grinding, or a splint as such. Dots in the back and lines in the front. So once we did load test, once patient came to us, patient told me that there is a lot of pain here, there is a lot of pain here, please treat me. So the first test I did was load test. Load test was negative. Then what I did immobilization test, stabilization test. It was positive. So then the first step which we do is called deprogramming. So if patient is having a lot of pain and if the stabilization test is positive, in my mind, provisionally I've diagnosed that there is some kind of problem with the muscle and not the joint. So if I am provisionally diagnosing the problem as a muscular problem, I need to deprogram the muscle, in simple words, because it is already programmed to create this problem in the masticatory system. So I need to get it back to a state where it is deprogrammed. So the procedure which we do for that is known as deprogramming. So what is deprogramming in simple words? If you see here, this is the lateral pterygoid muscle that is responsible to take the joint, to take the condyle away from its position when there is an interference inside the oral cavity. Once there is interference, as I spoke in the previous slides, the brain sends signals, engrams, and then the muscle accepts the signals and tries to pull the condyle away from its stable position to get the jaw away from the interference. Once that is done, then you encounter what is known as bruxism or parafunction. I don't want this problem to happen inside the oral cavity, which is leading to pain. So what I do, I try to cut down or shut down the signals which are being sent in between the brain and the muscle. The moment I cut down the signals in between brain and muscle, the muscle is no more receiving the signals from brain. As the muscle no more receives any signals from the brain, it calms down. It becomes really passive. It is no more active. The moment it becomes passive, the condyle, which is there in the anterior position, goes back to its anterior superior position, which is more stable. which is the centric relation, which is in relation to the thinnest avascular portion of the articular disc. So that is my main aim of deprogramming, trying to cut down the signals between the brain and the lateral pterygoid muscle. How do I do it? In simple words, you take the posterior teeth away from each other. The moment I take the posterior teeth away from each other, there is no influence of interference inside the oral cavity. The interference is away from the tooth. As the interference goes away from the tooth, the signals are cut down in between the brain and the muscle, because the brain is not sensing the interference anymore inside the oral cavity. As the signals are cut down, the lateral pterygoid becomes passive. It is no more in its hyperexcited state, and then the condyle shifts back to its centric relation, which is the most comfortable and stable position. It is in its happy space now. So if you see this picture, you'll understand that I am introducing a platform in between the anterior teeth so that the posteriors are separated from each other by at least 2 millimeters. Suppose I have 8, which is supraerupted. That supraerupted 8 should be away from the mandibular arch or the mandibular tooth, opposite tooth, by around 2 mm. So whichever is the most supraerupted tooth in the maxilla or in the mandible, that has to be away from the opposite tooth by 2 mm. That's the main aim of deprogramming. So we introduce a platform in between the anterior teeth. It's a short partial coverage platform which we introduce in the anterior region so that the posteriors are away from each other. And once the posteriors are away from each other, the lateral pterygoid, which is there here, becomes calm, becomes passive, becomes relaxed, and the condyle goes back. Here, if you see, there is a space between posteriors, whereas the anteriors are having a deprogrammer in between them in the anterior region. That's the whole concept of deprogramming. How many days can we do it? Can I tell the patient to wear this deprogrammer complete day, full day? Or should I tell the patient, okay, use 3 hours or 4 hours a day and then discontinue and then use it next day? The main thing which we need to tell the patient when we give a deprogrammer is to use the deprogrammer 24/7, except when the patient chews on something. Probably patient is having breakfast, lunch, dinner. You remove the deprogrammer, eat, and then immediately place the deprogrammer inside the oral cavity. So the patient has to wear it 24/7, at least by 1.5 weeks. So 7 days to 14 days is the time period of deprogramming a muscle. Whether there is a problem, whether there is no problem. Sometimes there won't be any symptom. Patient comes to you and you are deprogramming just to take the centric relation without any pain. Here, when patient comes with pain, we give the deprogram to diagnose the problem. It acts as a diagnostic aid. If patient complains with pain and you give a deprogrammer, patient comes back to you after 2 days and tells, doc, I'm feeling better now. I don't have that pain which I used to have before wearing a deprogrammer. Then deprogrammer acts as a diagnostic aid. It tells you significantly that, okay, there was some kind of problem with muscle, and the moment I gave deprogrammer, it's calming down. It's in its space now. That's how a deprogrammer acts as a diagnostic aid. It is not a treatment modality. Let me be very clear. It is not a therapeutic device. It is just a diagnostic device that is given inside the oral cavity to tell you that the problem is coming down. It also acts as a device which is used before centric relation recording. Suppose I am going to take a centric relation record for a full mouth rehab case. Even though there is no pain in the muscle, even though there is no symptom, I would like to deprogram the muscle still, probably for around 1 week, and then take the centric relation record. Because I'm very sure that the lateral pterygoid is relaxed when I deprogram, and then I'm getting the correct centric in its space. Okay, this is how we proceed with deprogram. There are a lot of deprogrammers available in the market. If you see this picture, the most common deprogrammer which we get in the market is your stock deprogrammer, which is Lucia jig. So how does a Lucia jig look like? It looks like this. It has a platform which is very flat. over this platform, the lower anteriors would go and fall on it. I don't want this platform to be inclined. I want this platform to be dead straight or parallel to the ground, because once the lower teeth go and fall on the platform, if it is inclined, then there is equal chance of the condyle which is there to get distalized. If it is straight, then the lower teeth fall straight on the platform and the lower teeth can do all the movements properly. If it is inclined, it might slip back. The moment lower teeth slip back, the condyles might get distalized. And if the condyles get distalized, they go and fall on the retrodiscal tissue, which is highly vascular, highly innervated. The moment it goes and falls on the retrodiscal tissue, patient will jump with pain. Because as long as it is in centric relation, it is in a vascular region, non-innervated region. But when it goes back, the retrodiscal tissue is full of blood vessels, full of nerves. I don't want that to happen. So I want the platform to be straight. It has to be parallel to the maxillary occlusal plane. Then the lower anteriors fall perpendicular to the plane, and they can do all these movements on the platform of a deprogrammer. So this is your Lucia jig. It is a stock one, so it is not customized according to the patient's oral cavity. It is universal in size. So what we do, we reline the deprogrammers. So we place some bite registration material here or medium body after applying triadhesive, and then we reline inside the oral cavity so that it becomes stable. Just like how I have shown in this picture. I've relined this with a bite registration material. This is your Coes deprogrammer, which is my most favorite deprogrammer in my practice, because it consists of a palatal plate which has more stability inside the oral cavity, just like a Hawley's appliance. It has a palatal plate, and you can build up the platform over the palatal plate palatally. So if I give this deprogrammer to the patient, the first one, Lucia jig, it has an extension on the buccal surface. So when patient wears it like this, it is seen through. Socializing becomes a problem to the patient. Sometimes phonetics could be a problem sometimes. So patients might not be comfortable wearing it and going outside and meeting people. Or if they're working, it could be an obstacle for them. But when I use this, there is no labial extension like this for a Coes deprogrammer. You just have a palatal plate inside, and the platform of the deprogrammer is built, or it is constructed over this palatal portion. So it is way inside, and the lower teeth fall on the platform. So it is more convenient for the patient to go and socialize when the patient is working outside. Not only that, I can use this Coes deprogrammer in deep bite cases also. I cannot use this in deep bite. I cannot use this in deep bite because it has a flat platform which is going from the labial to the palatal. So in deep bite cases, it becomes extremely difficult for me managing with the Lucia jigs. In such cases, I can prefer comfortably a Coes deprogrammer because the platform is palatal. And in deep bites, I can comfortably elevate the jaw and create that posterior disclusion. This can be given in constricted chewing patterns also. What is a constricted chewing pattern? Suppose I'm biting like this, like a cow. I'm going back and then coming front. But when I bite like a rat, when I come front and then go back, few patients will have this constricted chewing pattern, CCP. So in such cases, I cannot give a normal deprogrammer like Lucia jigs. Because the moment I come front and go back, the Lucia jig becomes loose. It is no more stable. And when I give this Coes deprogrammer, as it has a stability which is better inside the oral cavity, I can use this deprogrammer in CCPs also, where you have reverse chewing patterns inside the oral cavity. In reverse chewing patterns, the common complication is distalization of the jaw. So when I come front and go back, the condyle is getting distalized. That's a problem to the patient. So in such cases, if I want to deprogram, I can use this Coes deprogrammer. That's the advantage of Coes. Can be used in class 2s, can be used in deep bites, can be used in CCPs also. And it is more convenient for the patient. This is known as NTI-TSS deprogrammer, just for information's sake. This is used in temporal headaches when we use these deprogrammers because it has a concentration point on the platform. It is not like this, a single platform. It has a platform over which it has an elevation. So it has a concentration point because of which literature says that your temporal muscles will get relaxed and the temporal headache will come down. So this is known as nociceptive trigeminal inhibition tension suppression system, NTITSS, which is available as a stock deprogrammer in the market. This is your leaf gauge. The leaf gauge has plenty of leaves in it. It's like cotton rolls piled upon each other and we keep in between the anterior teeth. The only disadvantage of this leaf gauge is it is flexible. It is not rigid. So when the patient bites on it for deprogramming, the mandible could get distalized because it is flexible. That's why leaf gauges have to be used with a lot of experience and with a lot of precision. It is used for chair side equilibration of teeth because the moment I start removing the leaves from the leaf gauge, I can see in centric where is that first point of contact that is being achieved inside the oral cavity. Suppose I have 4 leaves or 5 leaves packed and I keep in between the teeth. I tell the patient to bite and check if there is any contact. Patient says, doc, I don't have any contact in the posteriors. Then I remove 1 leaf, again give 3 leaves. And then again bite, no contact, 2 leaves. Now patient raises hands and tell, okay, I am feeling some kind of tooth contact somewhere here. Then in that position, I take articulating paper or foil and then check if there is any mark that is falling anywhere inside the oral cavity. This is known as chair side equilibration. So leaf gauge can be used for chair side equilibration cases. That's the advantage of leaf gauge. It can be used for quick deprogramming of the mandible chair side. I would not prefer that. To be very practical, textbook says that leaf gauges can quickly deprogram the mandible chair side, but I would still use a Coase deprogrammer for 1.5 weeks to 2 weeks, deprogram the muscle well, and then go for a centric relation. This is our Indian product, which is available from MIK. This is known as Unwind. Moez, a dear colleague of mine, a good friend, has come up with this product in the market, which is known as Unwind. This is an Indian version or Indian product of Lucia Jigs. So it has a provision for the labial freedom not to get affected. It has a provision of a platform which can be used in class 1, class 2, class 3s. It has a big platform which can be used. It is more convenient to be used. So these are the different types of deprogrammers which we encounter in clinical practices. I would still prefer something else, which is known as custom-made deprogrammer. So if I'm using a custom-made deprogrammer, it means that I'm making an impression of the maxillary cast of the patient, customizing the deprogrammer according to the teeth that are there inside the oral cavity. All these are arbitrary, which I have shown, except for this. This might be customized to a certain extent, but all the other, these things are arbitrary. They're stock. But when it comes to here, it can be customized over a cast. You can use pattern resin, roll pattern resin into a small ball, and then make a deprogrammer for the cast. The requirements of the deprogrammer are the same. Again, flat platform. There should be 2 mm of posterior space. There should not be any interferences on the platform. It has to be a smooth movement, either in lateral excursions or the protrusion. The labial extension should not disturb the labial freedom. The palatal extension should not go onto the soft tissues. In simple words, that's it. So if you give these deprogrammers for 2 teeth, for 2 incisors, and then leave the patient for around 1.5 weeks or 2 weeks, this is the best deprogrammer I use in my practice. Custom made deprogrammers with pattern resins. Why use pattern resin? Because it is more dimensionally stable. It is more rigid than your self-cure pink or clear acrylic. That is my preference. So once deprogram is done, patient has come back to me. Patient says, okay, doc, I'm feeling better now. My pain has reduced considerably down. Then I would go ahead with phase bow. Phase bow is an instrument which is used to record the orientation jaw relation. So we take a phase bow record, we get the maxillary maxillary cast ready for mounting. Then we go ahead with centric records. Okay. Once the deprogramming is done, the condyle has shifted back to its position. And now I take a centric record with the Dawson bimanual manipulation technique. I record the centric with either alu wax, alu cakes, or your medium body or bite registration materials, whichever is the preference of choice. Then I mount the casts on a semi-adjustable articulator. Once the casts are mounted like this on a semi-adjustable articulator, now the mounting is ready in centric relation. This procedure, what I have done till now, is known as diagnostic mounting. Why is it called diagnostic mounting? Is because once I remove the centric record in between the maxillary and mandibular teeth, I can find on an articulator where is that first point of contact in centric relation, which is known as retruded contact position. And once I find that first point of contact in centric relation, which is acting as an interference, from there I can plan the treatment. Whether I can remove that interference, whether I can do selective grinding, or should I go ahead with a prosthodontic procedure in the form of a crown, or a restoration, or a partial bonded restoration, or should I go with orthodontics? There is a rule which is known as rule of thirds. So what rule of thirds says is, according to Okason, Sir Okason, if the interference is falling somewhere nearer to the central fossa, if the tooth is like this and nearer to the central fossa, you can go ahead with selective grinding, because I need to remove a little of tooth structure in the form of selective grinding to get that cusp into the fossa. If it is falling slightly away from the fossa in the second thirds, then I can go ahead with a procedure which is known as prosthodontics in the form of a restoration or a crown. If it is falling slightly away near the cuspal tip in the third thirds away from the fossa, then I can go ahead with a procedure which is known as orthodontics. So you either remove the interference, which is known as reshaping, you either restore, which is known as restoring, or you either reposition, which is known as repositioning. It's a triple R rule, RRR. Reshape, restore, reposition. Reshaping is selective grinding, restoring is prosthodontics, repositioning is orthodontics. So this is how we plan the treatment according to the first point of contact, which is falling nearer to the central fossa or away from the central fossa, from the diagnostic mounting, which we have done till now. So what are the important steps of diagnostic mounting? Deprogramming, phase bow record, centric record, and mounting the casts in centric relation on a semi-adjustable articulator. So this is known as diagnostic mounting. We prepare a splint also in this diagnostic mounted cast only. Where do we prepare? Prepare the splint in centric relation. Can I just guide the joint to centric relation and prepare a splint inside? Yes, you can do it, but it's difficult. Because you have saliva, you have tongue, you have cheeks. Everything is a hindrance to the visibility. So when I'm doing it, it becomes a messy job inside the oral cavity. So what I do, I take this out in the form of casts, mount them in centric relation, and happily do it on mounted casts outside the oral cavity, where I don't have these things as restrictions. So in centric relation, on the mounted casts, I prepare a stabilization splint. Why do I prepare a stabilization splint? Because patient recovered from pain when I gave a deprogrammer, number one. When patient says, doc, I've recovered from pain after you gave a deprogrammer, I need to continue this for a period of time, probably around 1.5 months, where patients feel positive, where patients feel extremely happy that this treatment is working on them. I also have a satisfaction that I've seen some kind of improvement over a period of time. So I convert this deprogrammer into a splint. So what do I mean by convert? I'm not just modifying this deprogrammer. Does not literally mean that. What I mean that deprogrammer is a partial coverage in the anterior region, whereas stabilization splint is a full coverage. So I prepare a splint which is a full coverage on the arch, which is having mutually protected occlusion, and it is prepared in centric relation. So if I prepare the splint in centric relation, muscle, tooth, joint are in balance, number one. If I give mutually protected occlusion, I am taking care of all these factors which I have discussed in the previous slides. Anterior guidance with posterior disclusion, canine guidance with all the other teeth getting discluded. So the whole system goes into a form of equilibration. It becomes an equilibrated masticatory or stomatognathic system. And once it is equilibrated, all the pains that are surrounding the jaws disappear over a period of time. So this is the basic thing which we need to do before we prepare a stabilization splint. This is an extra procedure which we do. We all know as prosthodontics that we go ahead with horizontal condylar guidance with protrusive records. You can take normal modeling wax to take the protrusive record because we are immediately programming the articulator by ourselves. But for centric record, I would prefer alu wax or an alu cake, which is available as a ready-made material. Or I would also prefer something known as medium body, addition silicone or bite registration paste, which is hard. The only disadvantage with the bite registration paste is it sets very fast. So the moment you take it inside the oral cavity and expel the material in between teeth, it would have already set. So if you have that control, prefer a bite registration material. If you don't have that control, prefer a medium body elastomer, which is your addition silicone, to make sure that you get a good centric record. I would not prefer a light body because it tears away. It is not stable in between the teeth. My preference of choice is anytime an alu wax cake or an alu wax sheets which are fused in the form of a cake. So this is the space for the deprogrammer. I take the centric record usually when the deprogrammer is inside the oral cavity in its place. It becomes easy for me to guide the jaw on a deprogrammer and take the centric record inside the oral cavity. So we have set the horizontal condylar guidance on an articulator, and now we prepare the splint in this space which is there between the maxillary and the mandibular cusps. I would start preparation of the splint with at least 2 mm of space in between the maxillary and the mandibular arches. A simple golden rule is vertical dimension which is increased by 1 mm posteriorly would give you 3 mm of anterior increase in space. So it is not a straight opening that is happening inside the oral cavity. It is an arc of opening and an arc of closure. So if I'm increasing VD by 1 mm posteriorly, I'm getting 3 mm in the anterior space. So I would take at least 2 mm as guide for the preparation of splint in the posterior area, increase, so that I get 6 mm in the anterior area. And then I would fabricate a splint, which is known as stabilization splint. Okay. So we'll see a case report now, which was done. How the patient recovered from. This is a case of diurnal bruxism, very mild pain, patient came to me, and how the patient recovered from bruxism as such. So when I speak about why patient came to me, as I already told you, patient's father used to notice a kind of movement in his son's mandible when the patient was doing some kind of work. So he used to do work from home, and whenever he was typing on a laptop, patient's father used to see that the son was doing some kind of movements with the mandible. It was unintentional from patient's side. Patient says that I have not noticed this much when it comes to myself, but when it comes to my father noticed it more than me at home. So patient complains of grinding teeth during daytime when he works in office for the past 5 years. So this has been there for the past 5 years. He has been using an appliance since long and there is no improvement. So patient has gone to a colleague already and he has been using an appliance, but the patient feels that there is no improvement. He doesn't complain of any pain. He just says there is some kind of very mild, vague pain inside my stomatognathic system somewhere. I don't want to localize it and I cannot as such. There is no other complaint as such. Very particularly when patients come to me this way, I ask the relatives if the patient has any anxiety issues, because I want to rule out nocturnal bruxism also at the same time. When patients come to me, it's not just diurnal bruxism I am diagnosing. I also ask about this stress or the anxiety factors that patients have, so that I can rule out the nocturnal bruxism, either in the form of history or in the form of something which the patient's relatives have noticed, either parents or relatives or attenders who have come with the patient. If you have noticed any kind of sounds during nighttime, they're really large sounds which you can hear from probably 3 rooms away from the patient's room. So there was no history of any anxiety. There was no history of any sound that was heard by the patient's attendant. So what I do next, I saw the appliance which the patient was wearing. The appliance looked like this when I saw. So this is a basic soft splint. This is a thermoplastic resin sheet which is made on one of the arches and given to the patient. So when patient wears this, what is happening? The patient is still wearing it in maximum intercuspation. The patient is not wearing this in centriculation. That's the first point. So as long as the patient is wearing in maximum intercuspation, there is nothing that has been changed. The interference is still on the splint now. It is a resilient splint. It gives more damage to the system. A lot of us think that it is a soft splint, it absorbs stresses, dissipates it. No. A soft splint is more harmful to the system when the patient is having a complaint with the muscle, with the occlusomuscular origin. So what is happening with this? It means that the splint is given in maximum intercuspation, not in centriculation. The patient is just wearing it and just biting on it. So whatever is happening in maximum intercuspation is still happening on the splint again. There is nothing that's been changed inside the oral cavity. The interference is still there. As long as the interference is still there inside the oral cavity, the bruxism which is there inside the oral cavity will not go away because the interference is still mediating it. The signals are not cut down still. So what could be happening inside his oral cavity? Because I have not seen the case to a large extent where I can go till diagnostic mounting. So what could be happening is what is running in my mind. The first instance, what could be happening is maximum intercuspation might not be equal to centric. That's why there could be an interference. That's why there is diurnal bruxism. It could be equal to centric also, but patient might be having an internal anxiety because of which there could be bruxism. Because what previous dentist has done on this patient, I don't know. Patient has not given me anything in the history. So I should work my mind in such a way that I rule out each thing one by one. The first thing I rule out is the maximum intercuspation might not be equal to centric. That's the first question mark. So what I have to do now, on a splint, I should make sure that the maximum intercuspation is equal to centric in static. And then give your mutually protected occlusion from there, from that point. The second question in my mind, can it be equal? Because he has gone to another dentist already. Was there a selective grinding that was done inside the patient's mouth and then a soft splint given? We don't know. So it could be equal to centric also. Patient doesn't know it. So what I have to do, whatever we know, what is happening inside is not the real thing. I have to do something called diagnostic mounting of the cast and see if the maximum intercuspation is equal to centric or if there is any first point of contact when I do the diagnostic mounting of cast, which is known as RCP, retruded contact position. Let's see. So I've already explained this, that there could be an interference which is leading to the lateral pterygoid, which is becoming hyperexcited, and that's why this bruxism might have set in. Usually a diurnal bruxism. If MI is equal to CR and still there is bruxism, it could be brain mediated. It could be a diurnal bruxism, sorry, a nocturnal bruxism, which is happening inside the oral cavity. So I want to do a diagnostic mounting. I want to make sure that the interference is eliminated so that the lateral pterygoid is calmed down, and I want to proceed in this case. So these are my final options. I either want to selectively grind, I either want to restore or reposition, or I either want to surgically correct the teeth. Surgical correction of teeth is not done in normal cases. Only if you have prognatism, if you have two jaws prognatism, If it is an extreme case where the jaws have to be corrected, then we opt for surgical corrections. Otherwise, it either falls in the 3 R's which we have discussed: either reshaping, restoring, or repositioning. That's the final aim of any permanent procedures that we do inside the oral cavity. But before I proceed with the permanent, I want to proceed with a reversible option. Which is the reversible option? Safest option, stabilization splint. So I give the stabilization splint. I check with the patient for around 2 months. If patient feels that the patient is becoming better with the splint on, then I remove the splint and start with the procedure, either your selective grinding or ortho or prostho. So the first step is deprogrammers, which is diagnostic or a partial coverage. As I've explained already, we have discussed that. The second step would be a stabilization splint, which is an occlusal appliance therapy. It is therapeutic and full coverage. It can be given either in the maxillary arch or on the mandibular arch. I would prefer a maxillary arch to 95% in all the patients, just for the fact that maxillary arch splint is more stable. Because mandibular arch, if I give a splint, it has less coverage when you compare it with maxillary arch. Tongue is there, so stability is an issue. The only advantage with the maxillary arch is it is more covering the area, it is covering more inside the oral cavity. It has more stability inside the oral cavity, and the lower anteriors can fall flat on the maxillary splint. But if I'm giving mandibular splint, the maxillary anteriors are protruded. So the mandibular splint might fall on oblique plane, which is not good when the patient is moving the jaw. I don't want that to happen. So I prefer something flat on the maxillary, and the lower teeth can fall on the flat plane and do all the movements in mutually protected occlusion. So that's the best option when it comes to me personally as a maxillary splint. But sometimes patients cannot accept maxillary splints because they're socially active. Sometimes phonetics might be a problem to the patients. In such cases, I would prefer to give a mandibular stabilization splint. So how to prepare this? So let's see what all need to be done when we prepare this. I would prefer to prepare the splint on the casts, not in the mouth. As I explained already, that in the mouth preparation becomes messy because of so many factors. So I would prefer to prepare the splint on the mounted casts, take the splint inside, and then do some minor modifications if needed. So that's the best method I follow with the stabilization splint. Okay, let's see the case as such. OPG was already present with the patient, and there was no periapical, periodontal, or TMG changes that are seen. I did load test. Load test was negative, as I explained. Immobilization test was positive. The muscles were tender. Muscle of mastication examination, we check 4 muscles usually. One is your masseter, one is your lateral pterygoid, one is your temporalis, and one is your medial pterygoid. I would usually bypass medial pterygoid because it is an internal muscle. It gives false positive results most of the cases. So I check only 3 muscles usually. It's the masseter, the lateral pterygoid, and temporalis. Here in this examination, the lateral pterygoid and the middle fibers of temporalis were tender when I did the examination. Back muscle group, there was slight tenderness when I checked the back muscle group. So this was the picture in maximum intercuspation. If you see this picture, it gives me no idea now. In maximum intercuspation, if I click, it gives me no idea. I mean, because everything looks okay, except for the anterior planes which are zigzag. Posteriors are having good class 1 occlusion in maximum intercuspation. When it really matters to me is in dynamic occlusion. What is happening inside the oral cavity? Let's see that. So this is the right view and left view. Now when the patient comes front in dynamic occlusion, I don't see any posterior disclusion happening here. There's still teeth rubbing against each other when the mandible is coming front. Here also there is one tooth contact. Here also there is one tooth contact. So posterior disclusion is not immediate. It is not progressive in this case when the mandible is coming forwards. That's my first point in mind. So there is some kind of trauma that is happening in the masticatory system, because of which probably the muscles are getting hyperexcited inside the system. Side movements, right side. If you see, the canine guidance is lost completely. This canine is not being guided with this canine. There is a lot of group function that is happening all over. I don't want that. The canine has to guide, and there should be a disclusion all over. That's my main aim of mutually protected occlusion, because this is an young chap of around 24 years. So all these are question marks in my mind now, provisionally diagnosing the problem as it is not mutually protected occlusion, which is leading to this problem. Let's see the left canine guidance. Crossover, the canine guidance is completely lost, and there is group function again, which is harmful to the masticatory system. Absolutely. So I want to change all these. I want to create a good anterior guidance with posterior disclusion. I want to give good canine guidance on both sides so that all the other posterior teeth are getting discluded and everything becomes equilibrated. The whole stomatognathic becomes equilibrated. It's in equilibrium, in centric relation. So if I see the occlusal pictures, there are some kinds of minor occlusal over wear facets, and major thing has happened here. On the canine, one of the inclines is completely lost. It's completely worn away. There is an incisal wear of the canine, one of the inclines. Let's see why. So what I do, I take diagnostic cast first. I take a Facebook record. I deprogram. I take centric records, and then I mount in centric. My diagnostic mounting is complete. Then I set my horizontal condylar guidance, and then I remove the centric records. Now I start preparing the splint in centric. Before I prepare the splint, I want to see where the problem is happening inside the oral cavity in centric relation. Rather than doing it inside the oral cavity, where I cannot see it properly because of these things, I would check it on the articulator now. So there is one armamentarium which is used to check, that is known as articulating silk. It is around 80 microns to 100 microns. We can use it conveniently over the mounted casts. So you can take a sheet of articulating silk, keep it in between the maxillary and the mandibular casts, open up this screw on the incisal pin. Once we loosen the screw, the maxillary cast drops down onto the mandibular cast in centric relation. Thus the VD is reduced. And once it drops down onto the mandibular cast, the articulating silk which is there in between will mark the first point of contact which is there. It could be anterior, it could be posterior. We don't know. That we need to see it on the diagnostic mounting. So let's see now where the first point of contact is coming in centric relation. So if I see this characteristically, very, very strikingly, I can see that it is on the lateral and canine. Maxilla, on the canine and the premolar mandible. So the problem is here. There is a first point of contact that is there, that is happening over a period of time in this patient, where the patient is going on these teeth first and then going on to the maximum intercuspal patient. So over a period of time, there is a typical wear of the canine incline that has happened, because of which the canine guidance is lost and there has developed a group function inside the oral cavity. So if you see here, if I zoom up, you can understand a typical wear of the incline of the canine, because the first point of contact was here. So every time patient used to go here, slide into maximum intercuspation, go here, slide into maximum intercuspation. So that over a period of time has created a problem inside the oral cavity. Okay, this will help me on a longer run, probably after I give the stabilization splint and I make sure that the patient is feeling better. Then this will help me to actually derive at one diagnosis, whether I have to do a restoration on the canine. and get that canine guidance, or whether I have to do orthodontics along with restoration to get the system into equilibration. That's the next part. But before that, I need to prepare a stabilization splint. Let's see. So what I prefer to do is, I take a base of the splint first in the form of a soft splint. So I tell my lab, please give me a thermoplastic resin sheet which is prepared on the maxillary arch in this manner. So I get this soft splint first, and then I add acrylic over the soft splint, which becomes hard later on. So first I take a sheet of soft splint, I put it on the maxillary cast like this, and then I put self-cure acrylic, which is hard, develop the anterior guidance in the anterior area in the form of ramps. So these are known as incisal ramps and the canine ramps. So the incisal ramp will give me incisive guidance with posterior disclusion. The canine ramps will give me canine guidance with all the other teeth disclusion. So I mix some self-cure. I put it on the anterior region of the soft splint, and on an articulator, I develop that incisal as well as canine guidance by opening the centric latches. Once this portion is ready, then I add some acrylic over the posterior portion as well now, and then I close down the upper and lower member in static relation, in static occlusion. So first I develop the anterior guidance, and then I develop the static occlusion in centric relation.
Dr. Mahidhar,
Once I develop this anterior guidance on the soft splint, and then I add up some acrylic on the posterior area now to develop the centric stops. So in centric relation, I close down the articulator in such a way that I get these centric stops of the functional cusp of the lower teeth. Now, when I do it, I should make sure that the acrylic should not flow in between the teeth on the lower arch like this. So if you see this picture, you'll understand that I've taken away all the acrylic that flows in between the teeth. I don't want those extension of acrylic in between the teeth, because I will not have that smooth anterior guidance with posterior disclusion. It gets locked once I have these extensions in between the teeth. So what I do, I remove all these extensions in between the teeth. I make a flat platform over the posterior splint with only this point contacts of the functional cusps. So only the functional cusp of the lower will touch the flat platform on the splint posterior. No other extensions anywhere. So when the mandible is moving, it will smoothly contact in static, and the moment it goes front, it will have immediate and posterior disclusion that is happening on the splint. If I have these extensions, it gets locked. And once it gets locked, the immediate and posterior disclusion becomes extremely difficult on a splint. So to incorporate this mutually protected occlusion over the splint, I make sure that the posterior platform over the splint is flat, and I have only this point contacts of the functional cusps over the splint. So I'll remove all these buccal excess, palatal excess, and in between the teeth excess. I just make it flat and polish it. So in anterior movement, I should have posterior disclusion. In static occlusion, I should have only the contacts of the teeth that are present on the splint, whether it is right side or whether it is left side. In lateral movements, I should have only the contacts of the canine guidance, with other portions being discluded. If you see here, all the other teeth are discluded except the canine. So I'm getting anterior guidance, I'm getting canine guidance, posterior centric stops in centric relation, and everything is having mutually protected occlusion with a splint that is given inside the patient. What I'm doing with this, I'm changing the occlusion. In patient, it was different. There was no canine guidance. There was no posterior disclusion. There was group function. So I'm completely reorganizing the occlusion. This is known as reorganized approach, which is different from the confirmatory approach, which we follow in normal cases otherwise. So I'm reorganizing the occlusion now in centric relation, just to make sure that the tooth is in equilibrium with the muscle is in equilibrium with the TMJ, and the whole system acts together in an equilibrated state. So once everything is equilibrated, muscles become relaxed, TMJ is also relaxed, and patients also start developing a positive feeling inside that the pain is decreasing. There is no bruxism anymore happening because of that interference that is there inside the oral cavity. So over a period of time, probably around 2.5 months, patient came back to me. I didn't see any kind of creases over the splint. When I see those lines over the splint, it means that the patient is still having this bruxism, doing these movements. I didn't see. When I called the patient probably after 10 days in the first visit, I did see some creases. I again modified the splint in centric and gave. After 2.5 months, I saw the difference. There was no more diurnal bruxism that was happening inside the oral cavity. Even parents noticed change inside the oral cavity. So what I did, I told the patient to wear it for 1 more month, probably around 3.5 months, because this bruxism is not related to pain. And then we posted this case for orthodontics. After orthodontics, I built up the canine, which is treated with a composite restoration. Now patient is doing fine with mutually protected occlusion inside the oral cavity. After orthodontics, I again do a diagnostic mounting. This is what I do. I again do a diagnostic mounting and see if my orthodontics has given me those stable contacts posteriorly, contacts anteriorly, if I'm having good mutually protected occlusion. If there are any minor changes, then again I do a very minor selective grinding to make sure that the patient is happy finally. If you do selective grinding after orthodontics, if you do diagnostic mounting and selective grinding after orthodontics, in most cases, most number of cases, there is no need for a retentive appliance also. The relapse of the case is very less if we follow this protocol. Diagnostic mounting, orthodontics, diagnostic mounting, selective grinding. That will give a beautiful result for the patient if we follow this sequence. And inside the patient mouth, if you see this, this is the final result. Lines on the canine, lines on the incisors, lines on the canine, no lines on the posteriors, dots only functional cusp to the splint. I don't want to call it fossa here because it's a flat platform. Functional cusp to the splint, point contacts in centric. So this is how I check in the patient's mouth now. If there are any minor modifications, I will do it in the patient's mouth. See here, there was a minor modification that had to be done. This contact should not be there. So I took the splint, I reduced a little here, so that I get complete posterior disclusion when it's going for protrusion. In canine guidance, you should have good disclusion on the posteriors as well. In centric, posteriorly, everything should be in contact as well as anteriors, minor contacts, and then you get anterior guidance. And when it comes to the intraoral picture, again, it looks like this. Good lines in the anteriors, very minimal intensity. We don't want very harsh lines on the anteriors. Good spread of the points on the splint when it comes to posterior centric contacts. That's how we come to dots at the back and lines in the front as a final perfect occlusion formula on even a splint when it comes to equilibration. So this patient, as I told you, I gave a stabilization splint first, made sure that the diurnal bruxism had a control over a period of time. When it comes to recall visits, what I do is I recall the patient 1 week afterwards. Why? Because once I give a splint, after 1 week, the centric might differ sometimes. The jaw might shift back a little. So when that happens on a splint, you will see anterior space developing. Because when I give splint, I will give a contact anteriorly also on splint. But after a week, when the jaw shifts back, I will see that anterior contact going back. Then I have to build again in the anterior region so that I have that point contacts again in the anteriors, and then anterior guidance with posterior disclusion. So 1 week recall is a must when it comes to a splint, just to check if the stable points are still there, centric, or the jaw has shifted back. If the jaw has shifted back, modify it in centric. Even posterior contacts need to be modified a little. Then I call after 15 days, again as a recall to check if the splint centric is stable or not. And after 1 month or 1.5 months, I call the patient to see if the patient is becoming better. So this is how I program my recall visits: 1 week, 15 days, and then one month or 1.5 months. And finally, as I told you, we restored the canines, and orthodontic treatment was given to the patient once the habit was broken, and the patient did well. Okay, I'll show you a few videos how a splint works inside the oral cavity. So this is a video which I want to show how a splint looks like on an articulator. When I'm preparing the splint on an articulator, how it looks like. So this is the canine guidance which we develop on the splint with posterior disclusion. Only the canine is guiding the ramp, and when it goes back again onto the canine. Every other tooth has to be discluded in canine guidance. And these are the centric stops which don't have any extensions in between the teeth, just the stops on a flat platform. And these are the
Goodman, you have many questions coming up. Questions
sir.
are there. That means they have understood something. I asked you to talk about splints and you have covered prosto in 2 hours.
Sir.
Huh? For a person who is having genetically a dentist. Yes, you're genetically a dentist.
Yes, sir.
Whole family is dentist. And living in a remote place, doing this much work, good. I'm happy about it.
Thank you,
You're
sir.
doing it. Really good. Only thing is there are few things.
Yes, sir.
First thing is I want to tell all the people who are listening not to get excited and go grind the tooth indiscriminately.
Yes, sir.
They should understand that our oral cavity mastication is a machine, live machine, and
Yes, sir.
you need to think of it in 3 dimensions,
Yes,
not
sir.
in 1 or 2 dimensions. Yes?
Yes, sir. Yes,
And
sir.
second, stop giving soft splint for every case that says DMJ pain.
Yes, sir.
I'm wrong?
Correct, sir. We should stop giving soft splints. The splints should be hard.
It has become tradition. TMJ pain, give a soft splint,
Soft
send the
splint.
patient. It
Yes, sir.
doesn't work. It doesn't work. And Mahidhar,
Sir.
I'm not
Sir.
fuck you. I'm happy. But I just would like to advise you one more point.
Yes, sir.
You have different types of microns, paper, silk, this, that,
Yes, sir.
and
Yes,
all.
sir.
Everyone doesn't have it.
Yes, sir.
So it's better they learn to read the intensity of the marking by using a normal articulating paper.
Yes, sir. Accept, sir. Dr. Sitaram Prasad, I think it's 16 micron in the posterior and 40 microns. No, anterior should have less and posterior should have more. So it's the way around. It's the way around, Prasad.
He got the numbers wrong. He got the numbers wrong. That's
Yes,
why
sir.
I didn't answer. He got the numbers opposite. Sitaram, I'll talk to you later.
How are you, Prasad? Dr. Nirmal Raj, if we use anterior deprogrammer for 2 weeks, will it cause supraeruption of no? It will not cause in 2 weeks. That's why we stop at 1.5 to 2 weeks and then continue with a stabilization splint.
No, Mahidhar, I will disagree on that.
Sir.
In young patients, in very young patients, even in 24 hours, sometimes it causes. So they need to monitor the case. Put it
Okay,
that
sir.
way.
Okay, sir. So recall and then check the case and then probably proceed with it. What is the ideal time for which deprogramming must be done before moving forward to take a centric record? There are different methods. They say 24 hours also is a technique. They say chair side deprogramming is also a technique. But if it comes to me, at least 1 week deprogramming is my practical experience. Dr. Sandeep Singh, it's a very good topic for discussion. I have personally done around 40 cases of OMD and TMD, and by God's grace, none have failed. But my question is, when during the course of treatment, you guide the patient to CR to transfer the wax record to semi-adjustable articulator, and then we have to believe on us as well the patient. And then when we study the cast and proceed further to the patient in next appointment. But when in next appointment, we start the equilibration and guide the patient to CR, and we see that the patient is giving a complete new position than what we had recorded on wax for CR transfer, then what should we do? Should we believe in CR record on wax or on the present record intraorally? Or we should start all the procedures from step 1 on wax record? The question raised is all because in our daily practice, we face a tough challenge to record on CR. Yeah. What I have faced here is, Dr. Sandeep, when I take a centric record, I make sure that I do a load test again after I do a centric record. In 80% to 90% of the cases, when I take the CR after deprogramming and I do a load test, what do I mean by load test is when I do a bimanual Dawson technique, I apply pressure downwards and backwards with the thumb, and then I lift the angle with the other fingers. So when I take this hinge pressure onto the joint, if the load test is negative with mild, moderate, and severe pressure applications, most of the times that's the correct CR we record. If you have not done with the load test, sometimes it might be a different CR record that you have recorded after deprogramming. So as you promptly and correctly said, that probably next appointment you might see some other posterior record that you get as CR. Do a load test, confirm it if the load test is positive or negative. And if the load test is negative in the next appointment, probably we have to demount the mandibular, retain the maxillary in the semi-adjustable articulator, and remount it again. Sir, any inputs for this?
Yes, Mahidhar. Sorry.
Any inputs for this question?
Sandeep, I'll talk to him. Sandeep is the one who started grinding the teeth in the department. I remember that. That was some years back. Sandeep, can you hear me? Okay, maybe they can't. What
Yes,
you said is right, and it is related to the point which I said. In 24 hours itself, if there is no opposite thing or opposite contact or mesial or distal stopping, the tooth will shift. That's why I emphasize on temporary. And if you're doing all these splints, the best method would be make the impressions in the morning, by afternoon or evening, deliver your appliance.
Yes, sir. While mounting in centric relation, how to adjust thickness of bite registration material and incisal pin? You don't adjust the thickness of bite registration material on an articulator, basically. If you are mounting in centric, you have the thickness of the record already as 2 mm. So you just keep the record and then mount it in that 2 mm record. So once you remove the 2 mm, you will have that space which is already available. So just remove the incisal, just loosen the incisal screw, the knob which is there, maxillary cast drops down onto the mandibular cast. So can we put deprogrammer in the form of aligner by putting hard palatal surface with resins and transparent? See, basic thing about deprogrammer is you should not have a posterior coverage. The moment you start giving posterior coverage, you're not discluding the posteriors anymore. So I don't prefer an aligner with an anterior stop, definitely. If you want, you give a Hawley's appliance with the palatal stop anteriorly so that you have that posterior disclusion. I don't want anything in between the teeth anymore if I'm deprogramming the system. Dr. Vidya, please explain the difference between maximum intercuspation, centric relation, and centric occlusion. Maximum intercuspation is teeth related. The moment I start closing my jaw, centric relation is joint related. So whatever we discussed till now, deprogramming and then guiding the jaw into centric, all these become centric relation. It is joint related. It is not tooth related. Centric occlusion is maximum intercuspation of the processes in centric relation. In simple words, before centric occlusion was equivalent to maximum intercuspation, centric relation used to be different.
Here, yeah, Mahidhar, you can add a small note on long centric.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So long centric is given in the anterior region, especially when the patient is in supine position, when the patient is in alert feeding position. Once the patient goes into supine position, the jaw slowly gets back. And when the patient bites in centric, you will have one point in the anterior. When the patient comes to alert feeding position, the jaw heads front a little, and you will have one more point in the anterior palatal surface. So that freedom from centric, which we give in the anterior region, is known as long centric. So there are two freedoms. I still remember our Vivas sir. One is freedom in centric and one is freedom from centric. The one which we give in the posterior, so that you don't have that lock in the posterior region, and the one which we give in the anteriors, so that you don't have a play in between the supine and alert feeding position. As mentioned, that soft splint has no role in occlusomuscular disorders, but does it have a role in treat? No. No. A true TMJ disorder, you cannot give a soft splint at all. Forget the occlusomuscular disorders. A true TMJ disorder does not require a soft splint nor a hard splint in the form of stabilization splint. No, that's a totally different concept. Usually what we see in true TMJ is either disc displacement with reduction, disc displacement without reduction. So there are different kinds of splints for it. One is anterior repositioning splint and one is pivot splint, which we give in true TMJ disorders. So it is a totally different concept which is away from stabilization splint, which we give in occlusomuscular disorders. How do we keep checking the centric relation in full mouth? This is a good question. We keep checking the centric relation in full mouth. First, when we take the centric, number one. Number two, on temporaries. And number three, when we shift the temporaries to the finals. So as Anil sir just mentioned, we were all trained in the department to check it on the temporaries. Temporaries are the best method to check the centric relation, whether it is still the same or whether it is shifting back. Any implant restored when implants are there, they are osseointegrated inside the bone. They don't have periodontal ligament space. So when they are osseointegrated, I would try to dissipate the stress in between the implants by incorporating more number of contacts. So I would give a shallow group function when you have a quadrant implant dentistry. Selective grinding, Dr. Saurvi, selective grinding I do, as sir rightly pointed out, selective grinding I do only in very, very specific cases. As sir told, we don't take the burrs and start grinding the teeth in every patient possible, because we are going to create a positive occlusal awareness inside the patient. What was not there? Patient might be comfortable. The moment we start grinding, patient might be aware that there is something abnormal happening inside the oral cavity, which is known as positive occlusal awareness. I don't want to create that inside the patient. So selective grinding, I do only in very, very specific cases. This case, I cannot do selective grinding because the occlusion is faulty. I want to change the whole occlusal scheme, which had a group function, into a mutually protected occlusion. So I had to go ahead with ortho. There is no question of selective grinding in this case. I think this was cleared by sir about the supraeruption part. Yeah, Shambhu.
Shambhu, supraeruption 1 to 2 weeks. Why are you forgot why I used to insist you give a temporary immediately?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I remember.
Shambhu. Okay, they can't talk. I'm sorry. We made it such a way. Okay. Carry
Yes,
on,
sir.
Mahidhar.
Yes, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are very clear.
Yes, sir. Puneet, good to see you. My question is what we get multiple contacts in RCP. You get multiple contacts sometimes in RCP, Puneet. You might be having two contacts also as RCPs, but it is very rare. Usually we have either one contact in the anterior or one contact in the posterior. But if you have multiple contacts, then you have to do this rule of thirds, take these points into consideration, and maximum number of points where it is falling, you decide according to those points, the treatment. Posteriorly, we should have more contacts than anteriors. So posteriors we should have contacts with 16 micron, and anteriors we should not have contacts with 16 micron. No, when I say more contacts in the posteriors, it is about the load. It is about the intensity, not the spread of contacts. So the intensity of posteriors is more, the intensity of anteriors is less, Prasad.
No, first, Mahidhar,
Sir, sir.
it would be better if you could clear which is more thick and which is more thin, 16 micron or 40 micron.
So if I'm taking a 40 micron in the posteriors, then I can
Which
see
paper
whether
is thin? Which paper is thinner?
16 micron, 16 micron is thinner and 40 microns is thicker. So if I'm using a 40 microns in the posterior, then I will get that intensity, load of intensity contacts in the posterior. And usually I can fine tune it again from 40 to probably around 12 in cases of implants. But in natural dentition, on unglazed crowns where they have come for check, trial fit, then I use a 40 micron first, check all the contacts. And then when it comes to anteriors, probably a 12 micron. So that I get down the intensity to a lesser extent. Is it, sir?
Yes, next.
Yes. Dr. Priya, I just explained it. I think I'm sure. Dr. Naga Usha, hi. Hello, sir. Can you please explain about the anterior posterior bite planes, indications, and duration? That's a different concept altogether, Dr. Nagusha. We can discuss that sometime. Else. Bite planes are
Naga-Usha, the posterior bite plane indications are different.
different, yeah. Freedom in CR, freedom from CR. Dr. Pratiksha, I think I explained just now. Yes, sir. I answered the question, sir.
You answered. So now you want to ask them any questions?
So no, sir. I just want to ask. Hope it was helpful. That's it.
Hey, you did a good presentation, man. I'm happy you did it.
Thank you,
And
sir. Thank you.
I'm very happy that you have hit on the same points that I keep telling.
Yes, sir.
Don't use soft splines. Don't grind indiscriminately. And in fact, yes, I wanted to actually start a separate session for the basically I wanted to start a separate session or a department for it, but still I'm thinking about it. Maybe I'll start and you will be one of the founder speakers. All the best.
Thank
now
you, sir.
only.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Now could we ask this any more questions? I can see 25 now.
I've answered, sir, all questions. And Raghu, sir, Dakshari, ma'am, any suggestions from your side? Soumya?
Yes, about that. Dakshini, Raghu, your comments, and please a request for all the participants. We want a feedback, because if your feedback is based on that, we'll see if we need to continue and how we can continue. And the feedback, once we get it, we'll forward it to Mahidhar, and that should give him some spirit to continue. Right, Mahidhar?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But overall, everything, it's nice to see you after a long time.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, man.
Same here, sir.
Hello.
Ma'am,
Yeah.
yes, ma'am.
Yes, Maheta, that was a good presentation. I'm sure all the participants found it very understandable, and it was done in a very simple language where everybody could understand. And
Thank
the
you, ma'am.
questions that came is an indication that they were all interested, and there were very few people who went out during the session. So that is a very good positive response. And I'm sure that, as Anil sir said, you will be able to visit us again as a guest speaker. And me at the university, I can definitely say that we would make all arrangements for the same, and we would love all the alumni to be a part of the progression or the development that's occurring at the university and the college.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll be more than happy to see you all.
Yes.
Raghu sir, any suggestions?
That was a nice, crisp and clear presentation, Dr. Mahidhar.
Thank you,
So
sir.
nice to hear our students give a precise lecture. Anyways, we look forward to have many more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
And Mahidhar, you know something?
Sir,
First time I'm listening to my student. Good night and thank you.
thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. That makes me very happy.